Welcome to the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. The stories we tell ourselves and others shape the lives we lead. I'm your host, Dara Lise Lyons. Welcome to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast, where the stories we tell ourselves and others transform and shape the lives that we live. Speaking of inspirational stories, my guest today, Jennifer, has been through some tremendous adversity and emerged with a sense of passion and purpose that she never knew possible. So I am excited to hear her talk about her experiences today and to get to know her better, and also get to know what we can do when life gets us down and throws us unexpected curveballs, and how we can take those moments and reinvent ourselves.
Thank you so much for having me. My story is one of reinvention. I was a litigator for 12 years when I had a near-death accident, which led me down a path to become an entrepreneur when I had no idea how to run a business and no plans of ever starting my own business. I started a business about 6 years ago doing consulting, knowing that I really wanted to turn it into a public speaking business, but being told that a career in public speaking was no longer going to be a realistic possibility for me given a brain injury that I suffered. So the last 6 years I've been growing it, and in the last couple years I was able to kind of turn it on its face and turn it into more of a speaking and training business with kind of a side of consulting. So now I do speaking and training. I go into companies, law firms, conferences, basically anywhere that will have me, and teach people how to network better. It's been a really long journey of physical and mental disabilities resulting from my accident, but now I'm on a really good path. And I love the work I'm doing, and I hope I can share my story and help other people who are going through other transitions in their own life.
If you're inspired by Jennifer's story and by other stories of personal adversity and overcoming, and you like to read, Loving Healing Press is one of our show's sponsors, and they have generously offered 15% off to any viewers and listeners of the Transformational Storyteller podcast. So to take advantage of their offer, go to www.lhpress.com and enter the coupon code DARALYSE for 15% off at checkout. That's DARALYSE. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about your story. And you talked about having a career in litigation. So
Yes.
This is completely different what you're doing now, right?
It is and it isn't. I mean, it is different in the sense that, obviously I'm not doing law anymore, although I do work with some lawyers, but the public speaking aspect, so I used to do trials and hearings and that sort of thing, and now I'm in front of groups and workshops and, on stages and things like that. So I feel like there are some similarities, and also I feel like a lot of the people skills that I had to develop as a litigator doing trial work have really helped me transition to what I'm doing now.
Well, and probably the attention to detail and the rigor, like are translatable skills, I would imagine.
I would actually say that the entrepreneur life is harder than what I was doing as a litigator.
Really?
The pace as a litigator was quicker. When you got called to trial and the demands, sometimes you're working around the clock, when you're on trial. But with the entrepreneur life, you're kind of 24/7. If you don't schedule time for yourself, everybody else will take it away from you because, people demand your time for so many different things, and you really have to create those spaces for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what was the entrepreneurial life something that you kind of wanted before the accident? Was it? So
No.
Talk to me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, it was not something I wanted. Obviously I went to law school. My plan was to stay in that world. It took on a lot of debt for law school. So, clearly that was a whole long process of school and the bar exam and all that fun stuff. And no, I really, even as a lawyer, I mean, I wasn't one of those people that thought down the road I'd start my own law firm or anything like that. It just seemed like too much work. And really, I feel like I did it out of necessity. You know, when I had my accident, I had really serious physical injuries, but I also had a traumatic brain injury. And because of that, I had issues such as memory problems. I couldn't remember my files. I couldn't find words. So I could have a conversation, but you know, I would not remember the anonym or synonym, or sometimes I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. My comprehension wasn't where it was. I couldn't even be in a space with multiple stimuli. So, for example, if I went to like a family event and there were multiple conversations and light and music in the background, I would actually start having like anger outbursts because I couldn't function putting anything in the background that I was able to put in the background before. So that's, you know, it's a really long answer to tell you that I felt like I started a business out of necessity because I really couldn't do a traditional 9 to 5 anymore, and I didn't know what I would be able to do. So I figured starting a business where I could do it at my own pace, and you know, if I needed to do something for an hour a day and that was all I could handle at that time, then that was all I could handle, you know?
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I think traumatic brain injury, like, that is so, you're basically recreating and you mentioned reinventing yourself. Yeah. And so that feels like a very challenging time to be starting anything new.
It was a very challenging time. By the time I started it, I was about 3.5 years out. So I had finished formal therapy. Like I had been obviously in the ICU in the hospital. I had a number of surgeries. And then I had treated at Bryn Mawr Rehab for 7 months, and then a place called Remed in Paoli that deals specifically with people with brain injuries. So I had been through all of that at the time I started the business. I still wasn't where I am now. It's taken a very, very long time. And even what you see now, which may seem fine, is not what it was before the accident, if I'm being completely honest. But it's obviously a worlds away from where I was. So by the time I started, it wasn't right after the accident, but it was a lot, you know, I was a lot worse off in the recovery process than where I am today, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, and can I ask, what was the accident?
Sure. Yeah, I was downtown on Penn campus at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was a pedestrian, and I got hit and pinned underneath a truck.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So they tell me that the only reason I survived is because I was so close to a level 1 trauma center because I was around the corner from HUP. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, and I mean, that just goes to speak to like the fragility of life and these paths that we think that we're on, and we are on, and then something happens and everything.
It's so crazy. I mean, you know, obviously if you haven't been through the specific kind of accident I just described, a lot of people have been through different things where, you know, it affects their life, and, you know, they might lose their life, you know, whether it's cancer or, you know, a different kind of accident. But yeah, you definitely go through that moment. I mean, at the time I was either 34 or 35 years old, and I was a newlywed. My sister's wedding was about a week to 10 days after the accident. So I had actually taken a half day that day from my job. I had a routine doctor's appointment at Penn to see my endocrinologist, and then my sister, who was getting married, was living in University City. So my plan was to walk over from my doctor's appointment and help her with some last minute wedding stuff. So that's what I was doing there. And yeah, your whole life turns upside down in seconds.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and then this type of injury, I mean, there has been and continues to be a long recovery. So it's almost like your life gets segmented into who you were before and what you were doing before, and then who you're still in the process of becoming.
Yes, I am not the same person I was before the accident. Some ways for the better and some ways not for the better. And that's been really challenging, I think, not only for myself. I mean, I think probably for the person it's been the hardest for is my husband, because, you know, I was a different person. I am a different person than the person he married. And I won't ever go back to be the person that I was, because you can't when something like this happens to you. So that definitely has its challenges.
Well, and then do you have an awareness of the ways in which you're different? Because I know brain injuries impact people differently and affect different centers of the brain.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, everybody who knows me now would say, oh, she's nonstop, she's everywhere. I can't believe how much you can juggle and all of this. But it's funny to me, I mean, just dealing with it myself, I can see that my focus and my memory still aren't where they were, that people don't see the downtime. They don't see, they see me out and about, but they don't see that it might take me a couple hours of sitting in the dark in my house with no sound, no TV, no radio, no computer, just to kind of process and be able to move on to the next thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes still that, maybe I don't share or I don't talk about, but that enables me to do what I'm doing now. But I think more than the brain injury, when I say I'm not the same person, is I think when you go through something where you almost lose your life, it changes your whole outlook on things.
Oh, so, yeah, absolutely. How could it not?
How could it not, right? So I think that's probably the respect that I'm most different. I think a lot of things that were important to me before are not, and vice versa. I think I'm a little bit more of a daredevil than I was, because I just don't care. I think my mom was really overprotective. She's passed away a number of years ago, but she was a very overprotective mom. And I feel like everything we did, she was like, this could happen, don't do that, And then I look at the situation I was in, and I was crossing the street in broad daylight in a crosswalk and almost died. So after that, I feel like, if that can happen and you can lose your life like that, what am I doing with myself? You know what I mean? So I think those kinds of things, I'll give you an example. I was afraid of flying before the accident.
Oh, really?
So I have one of my sisters moved to the Detroit area, and I would go visit her, and that's maybe an hour and 20-minute flight, but I would literally have panic attacks. And it was really hard for me. It's not that I wouldn't do it, but I would have panic attacks. So there was a lot of places I wanted to travel, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to do it. But after the accident, I thought, how silly am I? When you look at realistic statistics about what happens with plane crashes, it's so extreme, that something like that would happen. And I'm not living my life. I need to go see the world,
Wow.
So
that's phenomenal that's where you went. Because I feel like I would have maybe gone the opposite direction and just become completely anxious.
So I definitely went through a lot. I don't want to make it seem like I didn't go through mental struggles. I mean, I had PTSD from the accident. I had depression. I had anger. I had anxiety. A lot of mental issues that I had to work through. But I think when you talk about the anxiety, my main anxiety at that point was crossing streets. So because the accident happened when I was crossing the street. So I actually did have, I would say, several years before I really could cross the street without issues. A lot of the time I was treating right around the accident, when I started being able to be mobile, because I had so many physical injuries, I would literally have to take, at that point there was no Uber or Lyft, this was 2008, yeah. So I would literally have to get in a cab from 34th and Spruce to get to my sister at 31st and Walnut, because I couldn't cross the streets around where the accident happened. So I would get in the cab and ask them to take me 3 blocks because of the anxiety and the issues I was having that I hadn't worked through yet.
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, and I think, you bring up a point about things taking time and patience and persistence, and are you a person who comes to those things naturally, or was that a learning?
Not at all. Yeah. I have no patience. Everybody who's close to me in my life would tell you that, and I think, to be honest, I have less patience following the accident than I did before. I think people talk about, you get more patience with age, and if I'm being honest, I didn't.
Yeah,
I had no patience before, and I think I have less for things now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, and then, but you have well, I don't know, maybe it's more purpose, maybe it's the same, maybe it's just redirected purpose. But yeah, talk a little bit about that shift, because I feel like the work that you're doing is impactful and important in a different way than the work that you were doing before.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the main things that I had after the accident was social isolation. So I was very outgoing before the accident, and I'm very outgoing now, but there was a period of time when it happened that I didn't return calls. I didn't want to see people. I didn't want to deal with anything. When I had to see people, I wasn't myself. There were a lot of people in my life that didn't stay in my life. A lot of friends who just didn't know how to react to what had happened. I mean, some people that were close to me really helped me through it, and even though they saw some major changes, not for the better, they stuck with me. But I think having that kind of social isolation and then starting a business, I was smart enough to realize that I couldn't sit in my house and grow a business, right? Nobody knew me. They didn't know my brand. They didn't know who I was. So for me, I tell people networking saved my life. I know that might sound silly, but it really was the impetus when I started the business for getting me out of the house and, starting to get out to events and meet people and interact with people. It forced me to do that because I knew there was no way I could grow a business without doing that. So I started to see the impact that had not only for my business, to be able to grow it quickly because I built a big network quickly, but also how it helped myself, how it helped me personally kind of come out of all that isolation that I was in.
Oh gosh, and I mean, there's so many directions I can go in that, but I want to hear a little bit. You mentioned your marriage and your husband and how impacted he would be, but like, how was that for him to have you be in isolation? Yeah.
It was really tough. There's people close to us that talk about, excuse me, that talk about how we even made it through that time. I know it sounds bad enough what I'm saying, and I'm not one to mope with things, but just to kind of give you the short version, during that same period of time, he's an only child, and he lost both his parents, one after the other, to colon cancer. So his dad was dying at the same time I had my accident. And then we both lost our moms the same week at the beginning of 2011. So it was like this period of a couple years. It was our first few years of marriage. I almost died, and we lost 3 out of 4 of our parents. So it put a lot of strain on us personally and on our relationship. He really didn't know what to do with me. I mean, he was dealing with a lot, obviously, himself, but also trying to help me through such a hard time. And I can think of so many times where, like, he knew what kind of person I was before the accident, and I like to be out and about, and, he would suggest things to me, like on a weekend, I couldn't drive, I didn't have my license anymore because of my brain injury, but he would suggest, let's go do this, or, even though he hates to shop, let's go shopping, let's go to Ann Taylor or something. You love that. And I just refused to do anything and just like stare at walls and cry, and, it was very, very hard. It was a very, very hard time for us. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of people not knowing what to do with me, particularly him. And it was all at the beginning of our marriage. So, I mean, it just made it really, really hard. I mean, there was a short period of time, I would say a few months, where, I mean, literally, I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't shower on my own. I couldn't wash my own hair. I mean, he literally had to become my caretaker.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, and it speaks to both of you, really, the value that you place on relationships and on doing things consistently over time and maybe trust. Was it hope? Like, what do you think got, well, and even with the recovery, like, what do you think kind of got you through? Because I think it must have just been so.
What do you think got us through as a couple?
And individually,
yeah. I mean, for me, I would say about a month or so after the accident, I started immediately going to therapy. So for me, that was kind of like the thing I'd say that helped me the most. How soon to the accident I started going to therapy. I mean, I started with a psychologist, and along the way, I mean, I had a psychiatrist, I had a sleep therapist to help deal with nightmares and trauma. I mean, I had all kinds of, help. But I started seeing a psychologist about a month out, and it really helped me. I would see her weekly. And so, she helped me deal with a lot of the post-traumatic stress and the anger issues. I have to say, I wish my husband, and I mean, this isn't a secret when he sees this, he knows this, I wish he had also gone to therapy. Not necessarily with me, although they did ask him to come there with me and just kind of talk together. He never refused, but he also never went. So I felt like that was also a real struggle, because I felt like my psychologist and also Bryn Mawr Rehab, when they were treating me, they ask people that live with you, most often your spouse, to come and kind of learn tactics to help deal with things as a couple and, with my recovery. And he never went.
Yeah.
I know he was going through his own really hard time, like, what I just described. So, I mean, I don't necessarily fault him for that. But yet at the time, there definitely was some fault that I was feeling, because I was struggling with so much, and there is sort of a selfish aspect where you think like, well, he's my spouse, if he could just come and maybe this would help us through this easier, maybe that would be better. But
at the same time, sometimes for people disconnecting from their emotions is the thing that allows them to get, you know, to sort of muscle through. And if they're going through grief, it's like, I know there's been periods of my own life where I felt like emotionally it was a Pandora's box. And if I let the lid off, everything was just going to come out, and I like wasn't prepared to deal with that.
I think you make a really good point, because I think everybody deals with bad stuff and trauma and grief and everything differently. And I think for him, it was about staying busy, you know, like he just kind of threw himself more into work. And I just think he didn't want to address those kinds of things, at least on the same time frame and in the same way that I did, you know.
Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, I just think about your work with people now and what you're doing to kind of empower them on an individual basis, and how much has what you've been through really, like, I don't know, informed the way that you work with people, and how do you work with people?
I think it's really informed a lot of what I do, you know, because I think that I'm willing to take a lot more chances in my own life. And I really encourage people to kind of just like throw themselves out there. So even from like a business networking standpoint, I think, you know, a lot of people get really down on themselves. You know, I can't do this because I don't have enough experience yet, or I can't ask this person for an intro or a favor, or, you know, I won't necessarily get that opportunity. So I feel like it's enabled me to be a lot more of a cheerleader for myself and for other people when I'm working with them, and just kind of tell them to go for it, because, you know, there's that whole, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? People are going to say no. You have to get used to no as an entrepreneur. But I mean, I just think I've overcome so much that I feel like it's just such a waste of time to sit there and be like, well, I can't do this. What if this happens? What if that happens? So,
well, and it reminds me of the fear of flying that you had before. I mean, it's very real for people. It's very, very real.
Yeah, I don't mean to minimize that.
But it's also so limiting to act based on the perception that something could be threatening that really isn't that threatening. And so it's sort of like honoring people's emotional state, and at the same time saying, yeah, well, I get that you feel that way, and do it anyway, or take that action.
Exactly. And I think also, you know, back to your question a few minutes ago about how I really was able to kind of come out of this with all the help that I had, you know, with doctors and providers and the mental help and everything, medications, you know, I could go on. But I think at some point during that process, I had kind of an epiphany in my own mind that really it's on me. You know, that like people can give me all the help they want, but I'm not coming out of it because I'm not making a decision to get myself out of it, you know.
What do you think led to that epiphany?
So I actually think it was my mom's death, because it came, like, you know, I said, about 2.5 years after the accident. I wasn't as extreme as I was closer to the accident, but I also was still in a very bad place. And so then, you know, I started going to therapy and hearing about the compounded trauma, the trauma of the accident, and then the deaths in our family, and of course of my mom. And that really set me back. Like, you know, they say you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I took 2 steps forward and like 10 steps back. I was in a really, really bad place. But my mom was, in many ways, an amazing woman. I mean, she was, both my parents were immigrants, and she had to flee Morocco with her family because of anti-Semitism, came to this country with nothing, and, you know, had a PhD and spoke 7 languages, and had an amazing, intelligent, bright, I mean, lots of things going for her. Having said that, my parents went through a really ugly divorce, and it was very extended, and she got mentally and physically sick, and didn't really help herself in ways that she could have, and went very downhill and ended up dying very young. And, you know, definitely it could have been prevented. So I think when I saw that happen, you know, it was a real turning point for me of what I didn't want to see my life become. I feel like in retrospect, everything that happened with my parents' divorce, my dad's a very well-known lawyer, and it was very public. And I think watching what happened with that, she kind of let her life be defined by that situation. And it just went very much downhill, much more than it was. And so for me, I kind of looked at that, and even though I was in such a bad place, you know, I kind of told myself, like, is this the road I want to go down? Like, am I going to let this accident define me, or am I going to get myself out of the situation? You know?
And, like, you know, sort of allowing your life to be sidelined by something that devastating, horrible, but like you still then have a life to live, and
Right.
you didn't die, and so kind of like making that choice to choose to live,
to choose life and choose, I always say choose happiness. You have to choose it for yourself. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've come out of is when you hear people say happiness isn't like being cheerful and gleeful every day. It's a state of mind, and just choosing that every day. Like, how am I going to make myself and people around me happy? Because I was unhappy for so long and in such a dark place, and I don't want to go back there.
Well, and to me, my sense of happiness is inextricably linked to my sense of meaning and purpose.
Yes.
Like, I'm not happy moment by moment, but I have an unshakable purpose. And so that gives me like a touchstone that I then find a lot of moments of happiness along the way. And so I guess, do you feel like your sense of meaning and purpose has shifted? And what was it? What is it? Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
Definitely. I mean, I think when I was a litigator, I was very good at what I did. But being a litigator, it's contentious all the time. Your opposing counsel's against you. Sometimes the judges are, terrible to you. Sometimes they're lovely. Sometimes they're not. I worked in-house for insurance companies, so sometimes, you work well with the people, and sometimes you don't work well with the people. But it's always contentious. And at the end of the day, I mean, not to minimize anything I did. I think I did a great job, until I had the accident. But I mean, you're either saving the insurance company or you're not saving the insurance company money. And I'm not saying that's not important, but at the same time, is it purposeful? Did I leave at the end of the day feeling like I was changing the world? No. So I think, sometimes good comes out of bad things. And I think with what I'm doing now, it opened me up to really feel like I can change people's lives. And I know that may sound so egotistical, just like to be, doing like business speaking and stuff. But I mean, I've really seen the impact it can have on people. When you show them that you can be a better networker and really change your life, change your relationships, whether it's personal or professional, change your business. You can do it quicker. You make less mistakes than I made as a new business owner. And I think the other thing is, I had a very insular network before. I had a good network, I had a strong network, but it was mostly lawyers, mostly all lawyers. So for me, when I started as an entrepreneur, that was really hard because I had no entrepreneur support. But now I've developed such a big entrepreneur community, and it's really exciting. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. When you are able to meet different people every day and hear their projects and their stories and their hopes and dreams, and I think entrepreneurs are just like always thinking of the next thing, the next big idea. It's such a different community than the space I was in a positive way.
Well, and the work that you do in terms of like creating networks and business development, like I think that you said, it might be egotistical to think about yourself as changing lives, but I think that's exactly what you're doing, because business is such a big part. I mean, most of us spend at a minimum 40 hours a week working, at a low minimum, right? And so that's a ton of our time. And then if you're helping people to create deeper relationships and connections within that, then it means that they're feeling fulfilled by their work lives, which then spills into every other area of life. So like, of course you're changing lives. And I'm sure that you end up dealing with some other things that don't just end up in the business realm, because in the consulting space, I know, like you can't just take a sliver of someone's life and think that that's representative of all of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, what we're doing here today, where we're talking more about my personal story, it's only been in the last maybe year or two that I feel like I've really been able to even share the kinds of stuff I'm sharing today. So I've had a few places where I've been able to have a public platform and do speaking on my story, and how I overcame it, and then also how other people can overcome things, and the whole idea and the importance of sharing your story. So I'd love to start doing a lot more of that now that I feel like I'm at a place where I can. And I definitely see how that can change people's lives. I've even seen it just in the few that I've done. Like I did this event in May. There's this thing called the Fearless Women's Network.
Okay, yeah.
And so I was asked to do that, and it's through the Fearless Restaurant Group. And they own a number of local restaurants, including like the White Dog Cafes.
Yes.
So I did it at a place called Autograph, and I'll just give an example. I mean, we probably had, 35-ish, maybe a little more women there. Some of them I didn't know at all. a couple of my best friends were in the room. And so because I shared my story and we kind of broke up into groups and tables and were sharing other stories, I came to learn that one of my best friends who I've known for like 7 years shared something that happened to her that I didn't know about, even though we talk like every day. So she felt in that space, you know, after I shared my story, that somehow with people that she didn't really know even, that she could share it. And it was news to me. So, I mean, I was like, this is really impactful. And I would love to do more of this, you know, where people feel like they have a space to share this.
Oh my gosh. And I think that that sense of, I can't share this, or I'm not going to talk about this. I think sometimes people need to keep things to themselves, or they're just not ready yet, and that's totally okay. But I think that sometimes that lack of being known, that lack of letting ourselves be really seen, it creates a sense of, you mentioned isolation after your accident, but I think there's isolation even in our interpersonal interactions and relationships that people can feel.
Definitely. I mean, I think you feel, you know, sometimes when people have a wall up, not always, but I mean, I think, you know, when you don't share all of yourself, I think, you know, it is noticeable. Or at least it's noticeable to you. You know, when you get to a place where you are sharing your whole self, I think it's just a different path, you know? Yeah.
And noticeable to you, I mean, you spoke earlier about how, you know, well, people don't see that I might be interactive and then I'll have to go home and spend an hour or 2 hours just sort of decompressing and alone. And I think that, like, something about letting people in on your process, for me anyways, it gives me more of a sense that, oh, like, it's not necessarily super easy for that person who I admire to be where they are. So maybe I can step outside my comfort zone and know that, like, it's okay, that they don't have anything that I don't have within me. They're not like this perfect person who has it all together.
Absolutely. I mean, I really do try to share that, because it is a struggle for me. Like, everything that I do is more of a struggle than it was before the accident, and it is a struggle. I mean, to people who don't know me well, and it looks like, you know, a nice life and everything, and maybe it looks easy, but, you know, I'm definitely quick to share that it isn't, and it hasn't been, you know. So, I mean, I'm struggling probably more than a lot of people, but it doesn't mean that I can't accomplish the goals I want to accomplish, you know. Yeah.
Well, what are some of those goals?
Yeah. So, you know, I think the biggest one that I've had in the last couple years that I still haven't accomplished is to do a TEDx talk.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've applied to some. I haven't been selected. I'm going to continue. That's probably the biggest one on the horizon. The last more than a couple years, I'd say 5 or 6 years, I was applying to the Pennsylvania Conference for Women, which is a big women's conference at the Convention Center. So I've been applying there for at least 5 or 6 years to speak, and this past October I finally got selected. So that was one of my big, like, dream goals.
So did you speak this October?
I did. Yeah.
How was it?
It was awesome. Yeah. So I mean, just, you know, setting a goal and, you know, just not giving up on it. I think for a lot of people, they set the goals, but then, you know, when you get a lot of discouragement and rejection, it's hard to kind of stay with it. And I would have applied 10 more times if I had to, you know, which is the same thing I'll do for TED. Like, I won't give up until I'm on the TED stage, you know.
Well, that's so interesting, because you said that you're less patient than you were before.
Yeah.
But you're also so persistent. And that's something that I personally have to contend with within myself, because it's like, I have these things and I really want them to happen, and I'll be like a dog with a bone and just go for it. But then that process of, like, discouragement or letdown and then going, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like, you know, I don't want to say we don't all have our moments. Like, there are definitely moments where I've wanted things and got rejected, and I've been in, like, in a dark space. Like, but I kind of have this rule now, where I only let myself wallow for, like, a short time. Like, basically my time frame is 24 to 72 hours. You know, I will 1 to 3 days, and then I have to move past it. Like, I just have to, because I won't go back to that really dark space that I was in. And I just think there's no point to it. There's, you know, so I think, for me, I mean, the patience and the persistence seems so different, and I get the sense that maybe it's the same for you. The rejection, I think, for the most part, you know, after that 1 to 3 day time period, it really fuels me.
Yeah.
Just like when I was treating after the accident, and, you know I treated with such amazing people at the different facilities I talked about. I don't want to undermine anything, because they're absolutely amazing people, the kind of stuff that they have to help people overcome. But I was also being told that, it was not going to be realistic for me to have a career that involved public speaking again, when that was the only thing I really loved to do, like doing my trials and everything. And, I was being shown examples of people that had a good recovery that were not examples of where I wanted to be. And, I'll tell the story, and I don't mean to minimize anything about it, but you'll see what I mean. There was a guy in my rehab that had been through something similar to me with a traumatic brain injury and a terrible accident. And one day they introduced me to him, and he was part-time. He was a couple years out, I think, from his accident, and he was younger than me, and he was working part-time as a waiter. There's nothing wrong with working as a waiter, but before the accident, he had been some sort of professional. I can't remember what. He had gone to school and had, they sat with me and said, isn't it wonderful that he's able to do this now? This is what you can, look forward to be able to do. Like, you're going to get to a place where you can work again, too. And I came home, like, so angry that day, thinking to myself, I have multiple degrees, I have all these goals, and if the best that I can do is wait tables, 3 days a week, I am not going to see that as an accomplishment, just because of where I wanted to take things in my own life. So, I think, where was I going with this? I think, the persistence. The persistence. Yeah. So I think for me, the reason I'm telling this is because I think personally I get fueled by that, that whole like, tell me I can't attitude, I think that when I hear that I can't do something, I won't be able to do something, I just want to show people that that's not the case. I want to show myself that's not the case.
Oh, me too. Spite is one of my biggest motivators.
Yeah, I think it's a great motivator. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and there is like this intrinsic sense of knowing like who you are, what you want, what your life can offer.
Right.
That I think it's balancing that. It's balancing that sense of like, okay, what are if I do want to be on the TEDx stage, let's say, but I'm not in a place where I can even stand up for, those 5 minutes or 10 minutes, like, right, like how do I set these small measurable goals along the way and never lose sight of that big goal, but also not minimize the achievement of being able to stand on my feet, being able to walk to the other room, being able to shower again, when after having my husband have to do that for me. So how do you kind of navigate that line?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know if I have a clear answer to that. I mean, you're right. I think, I think as a society, and certainly myself, included in that, we don't celebrate the small victories as much. I think for me, I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm like, yeah, that was an accomplishment when I could get dressed again, when I could drive, when I could do this. But at the time, I didn't really see that, I really kind of only saw the big goals of like, I want to be back where I am standing in front of crowds and being able to speak and do everything I want to do. I want to be in a place where I'm able to be social again and juggle multiple things. Like, I was really only looking at the big goals. So some of the smaller steps that you're talking about, which were actually really big steps at the time, I really didn't interpret that way.
I'm the exact same way, and people in my life always will say to me like, well, you hit this benchmark or you did this thing, and I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't count until this, this bigger thing. Like, I want to be with a big 5 publisher, and it doesn't count unless it's that. I want to be, and I don't know, because I think for me, the thing that keeps me going is that inability to be satisfied.
I think I'm the same way, and it's funny, like I feel like at the end of the year, we always get to that place where it's like before New Year's and you're kind of taking stock of what your year's been like and what did you accomplish. And I remember last year, talking to my husband and saying like, well, my big goals were, this was before this year, so it was like the PA conference, which I hadn't been selected for yet, the TEDx. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. Oh, because I've been wanting to do, even though I'm not a runner at all, I've been wanting to do the Broad Street Run. That's like something I really want to do. And I had my 4th Achilles surgery last December. So I don't know when I'm going to be cleared to do something like that. But anyway, so I'm looking at this list. And so at the end of 2018, none of them had been accomplished. And I was like, wow, I was really depressed. I was just like, wow, I didn't accomplish any of my goals this year. And it's a hard kind of pill to swallow, you know, but then he was like, well, you know, look at these other 10 things that you did.
Yes.
How come you're minimizing that? Like, you were able to be published in this, and you spoke here, and you did this. Why aren't you looking at any of that, you know?
Yeah.
But I wasn't.
No,
you know?
no, and I'm right there with you. I'm like, well, of course you're not looking at that. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's not, but sometimes I think too, and when you coach people and you speak, like, sometimes I think we can see other people's achievements and accomplishments better than we can see our own. And also in therapy too, you mentioned therapy, like I think sometimes that's a value, that having people that we can speak to who know our ultimate goals and dreams and visions, like, can remind us that we are making progress, even if it's not the result that we want yet.
Right, no, definitely. And I feel like I'm so good at being other people's cheerleader. You know, people say, I'm in a bad place, or I'm feeling stagnant, or whatever it is. I'm able to say, no, you know, you did this and this and this, and like, you're so amazing. But it's very hard to do that for yourself. Yeah.
Well, in this moment right now, what's a way that you can acknowledge that you are pretty amazing? Like,
yeah, I think one thing I haven't discussed, which I'm really proud of, is a couple years ago I took up boxing. And it was really tough for me because, you know, I was not somebody who was like an athlete or skinny or anything before my accident, but obviously we all know it's important to stay healthy. And, you know, I was definitely somebody who tried to make that a priority, didn't always do the best job at it, because I think, you know, people talk about finding something you love and then that'll enable you to stay more healthy and fit. But I was one of those people who would go to the gym for like 6 months religiously, and then I would decide I hate it so much and not come back for 2 years. Like, I was one of those people.
Yes.
So I used to, a few years ago, I was hosting a local TV show in Lower Merion, and I used to highlight different entrepreneurs and, you know, authors and different people like that. And a woman reached out to me. I didn't know her, and she said, I saw you do this local show. I run this boxing and spin studio with my husband. Can I come on the show? And I thought, sure, you know. Yeah. She came on the show, like, we had a nice interview, and at the end she said, you know, you should really come try our boxing classes. You know, our first class is complimentary. You know, anytime you want to come, let me know. And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm looking at her, and she's like super fit and like positive and everything. And I'm like, of course I'm not going to try this. Why would I try this? But, you know, the reason I mention that is because of everything I'd been through physically, I had been trying so many different things, and I live with so many chronic injuries, and I'm still having surgery. So it's been so hard for me to find something where I can get a good workout, but also it's not making any of my injuries even worse.
Yes.
So, and also something I enjoyed. So all of those things, right? So long story short, I ended up trying it. My first class was great, but so hard. And I started going, and it was the kind of thing where I would go to a class, and it was so hard that I would come home and like get back into bed for 3 hours, or sometimes the whole day. I'm not gonna lie. You know, and so now a couple of years later, you know, I've had a couple breaks with different surgeries, but I love it. I mean, it's literally changed my life, and I don't mean even from a fitness standpoint, although it has, but just from a confidence standpoint, from a strength standpoint, like an inner strength standpoint, and even the combinations when I look at where I started, because those kinds of things are so hard for my brain, and what I'm able to do now, and I can really see like an ROI of that. It's been life-changing for me.
Oh my gosh. And to give you an outlet, you had mentioned anger in the immediate aftermath of the accident, and even for a long time afterwards. And I feel like to be able to sort of channel some of that emotion.
100%. Yeah.
Wow, that is so, your story is so inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
And I love, so let's say people wanted to get in touch with you because they want you to speak, or they want to sort of find out more about your personal coaching. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so this is where I should look at the camera.
Yes, sure, yeah.
So if you want to reach out to me, my website is purposefulnetworking.com. My personal email is jennifer@purposefulnetworking.com. You can also reach me on all types of social media, but on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at RU Networked, which is AREYOU Networked. So
thank you so much,
Thank
Jennifer.
you. Thank you for having me.
Well, yeah, and you talked about purpose, you know, and I think each of us, we're kind of, I don't even know if I want to go spiritual with it and say like we're here for a reason, but I think we do all have a purpose, whether it's a purpose that comes from outside of ourselves or a purpose we give ourselves. And I think that purpose is like sort of tied to the story of our life. And so I'm just wondering, like, let's say your story were in a book somewhere and someone was to open the book of your life, what would be the message or the takeaway that you would want them to emerge with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, but I think it would just be, even though it's so cliche, is just, live in the present. I think at the time I had the accident, I didn't realize how stagnant my life was. Not to say I wasn't a success or I wasn't happy in some respects. I didn't have good relationships, but it was so stagnant. And I feel like it did take something this big for me to make so many changes in a positive way with different, not just my business, just many aspects of my life, my relationships, my health, there's so many things. So I think, people are always, and I include myself in this, we're always looking, this is what happened in the past, this is what I need to do tomorrow, and it's so hard to live in the moment, but your life can change like that.
Right.
I still look at the whole situation that we're talking about, even though it was so many years ago, and I think about how quickly everything changed, how jealous I was of people that were living a normal life when I had my life put on hold for so many years,
Yes.
how jealous I was of my husband watching him even go to work. When I wasn't able to even leave the house or just go to rehab. So just be appreciative and live in the moment, and don't put off things that you want to do. Just live your life. I mean, I got a tattoo for my 10th anniversary. I never thought I'd do that. I went zip lining. I'm going to do the Broad Street as soon as they clear me. Live your life. Yeah.
I love that. Well, and life happens in those moments. Whether it's a moment happens and it changes our life, and it's something that happens outside of ourselves, or we can make a choice to change in the moment and to live differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. If anyone knows how to get up after life gets them down, it's Jennifer. Her story is so inspiring. Speaking of that, one of our show sponsors, Just Strong, a lifestyle and clothing brand for women, has the motto of the squat, because what they say is that the real strength comes from getting back up after we get down. They've generously offered 10% off to any viewers or listeners of the Transformational Storyteller podcast. And to take advantage of that offer, just go to www.juststrong.com and enter the coupon code DARALEASE10 for 10% off at checkout. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller podcast. As always, thanks to our episode sponsors, our production team at Rebel Hill Consulting, and of course, many thanks to you, the listener. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're creating stories that empower you and inspire others.